So here we had something that's sort of percussion-like, right? But also something that shares the feeling, avoiding the questioning I, right? And because it's wrong, can be made righter. Are you with me? Do I make any sense? Well, one of the first places it occurred to me to do this was in relation to suicidal intent, because God knows there's nothing that concerns us psychiatrists more than the possibility of suicidality. Can you see that? Now I'm using the word sounding now rather than percussion. And I'm beginning to go into the question of how we might talk in a routine way, in a casual way, in the course of our interactions that would sound out various levels. And here's the level of suicidal intent. And you'll see, I don't mean these should be made in order, but you'll see what happens when you do this. You may feel awful, this may be more than you can bear. You may want to die, you do want to die, you've planned how to die. All those are statements made to a patient which elicit inevitably a kind of partly spontaneous response back. So you're sounding out the depth of this person's despair, right? Now, it didn't occur to me when I began it.
Lisa Kennedy, 567. Lisa Kennedy, 567.
I wish some of you would interrupt, and not only that thing reminds me, it's a blessing. I wish some of you would interrupt and make sure that I'm really keeping on the track here, or that I'm making sense. And we'll stand up and say something which levels my plane. Well, please do. Gives me a chance to drink my water as well as to worry about these things. So here I thought to myself, here was what I called going below. And when I did that with people, they usually follow me a little way. And then when they say you may want to die, they say things like, well, I did, but I don't anymore. So I had a feeling of where I was in terms of their life or death interests. Some people will follow you right down to the bottom. You've planned how to die. And you begin to find out that most dread of discoveries about the person's imminence to suicide. So that was the first thing. I'd gone to a percussion-like thing. I realized it was approximate. I had developed very crude, these are all very crude, of course, crude measures of how deeply the person wanted to die. And then I thought to myself, but this is too pathological. Really what I'm testing is a person's desire to live. A person's desire to live. So that this itself with a suicidal person is upside down an account of how much a person wants to live. Now that I would say the desire to live was a health function, like the desire of the heart to beat. I would say that was a health function. So I had now by accident stumbled on the testing of a health function, the desire to live. Well, then I had some others that occurred to me. I'd always been extremely interested in the way in which in what in term I invented, counter-projection, by which you tell how paranoid a person is and also reduce the level of paranoia. Something I discovered was the way Harry Stack Sullivan worked, although he never gave an account of it himself. And but now let's, instead of seeing this as an effort to find out how paranoid someone is and to reduce and share their paranoia, which is done by this, think of it rather as, are you able to trust as the health function? Can you function? Can you allow into your current mental state the notion that somebody might not be an enemy, might be a friend? Now, it's a great contemporary, and always has been, that's contemporary, concerning how paranoid should a human being be, right? As I get older, I say you can hardly be paranoid enough, you know? But that isn't quite true either, because I can say that in part because I have a lot of trusting relationships. And so when I say that, people know I don't quite mean it. So they don't lock me up right away anyway. But now when we're worrying about paranoia, You say to the patient, you may wonder, can this be true? Can the black, can the dark things happening? Can they really be happening? And you say, if yes, it does, there's too much evidence to doubt it. You begin to get at the person's experience of evidence for this, and then there doesn't seem any doubt at all. Well, you go into other aspects of the what I'm now going to call the testing of trust. All I got to do is find where the hell these things are. Here's another illustration of the scope of a paranoid belief. Or again, read this in reverse in terms of the capacity to trust. The patient says, they're watching me. And I say, well, it may have been going on for a long time. See, I'm now trying to find out about the duration, the extent of this conviction. No, only recently. It cuts it down for me. And I say, I hope it isn't your family. No, they help me. Sometimes I say there are plots to kill, right? I wonder how virulent this seems to the person. And the patient says, I was afraid of that for a while. I don't think so now. So in other words, you're sounding out the limits of this paranoid business and have some better idea of how sick the person is, or by reverse, how healthy they are. Well, I don't. You've been listening to all of us for such a long time now. I hate to keep you from your lunch. Let me just give you two more. There are many of these that I've done, and I'm sure you could invent equally good or better ones. You might even be able to find them when you need them, too. Here's something. Here's a fundamental. Now, this is a more ambitious effort. This reminds me of reflex testing. See, reflex testing tells you about the effector system, the system of nervous phenomena which allow you to act, for the leg to kick, if you like. And what is psychological intentionality? Psychological effectorness. What is that? Well, you can think of different levels of it, can't you? I mean, many people in despair cannot dream of it, cannot think of acting at all. They're hopeless. And that could be an earlier one of these. Or they may say that, you can say to the person, you dream of this, and they have the capacity to dream and wish. And then you may want to do it. There may be some sense of activity possible for them. Or that you may feel you can do it, a kind of confidence that enters the person. So now we're talking about a normal function and the level of its impairment in certain conditions. Here's a statement I made about this. This may be helpful to you. I hope it is. If I can find it. Is there something on the floor? Oh, here it is. No. Oh, here we are. Now here's a paragraph that I wrote out, and I'm suggesting that these things be done informally, casually, the way you percuss the human body casually in the course of an examination. And are easily incorporated in any kind of clinical exchange. I said to someone who was very uncertain about her search for hope, you may not know what you want. In other words, there may be no coalesced dream, I'm saying. And she immediately responded, spontaneously responded, that you knew what you wanted. But then I added, but you may despair of ever getting it. Then she choked up and cried. Here was a sounding of the presence of a dream in the presence of despair. That's a discrete, delineation of the state of a person's intentionality. Another patient who was unclear about her goals and always busied herself with other people's purposes. When I said to her, you may not feel entitled to have a goal of your own. You'd be entitled to have a dream of your own. She choked up and spoke of being unworthy. So here was somebody who not only lacked the capacity to act on her own, she lacked the capacity even to imagine acting on her own, to dream on her own. And so we're plumbing in this crude way the level of human intentionality, which must be a very fundamental part of human health. Well, that's enough of that. I hope that makes some sense. And again, I know that if you put this next to the elaborate chemical and physical devices we have in medicine, it seems very crude. But I suspect that it's necessary at this stage in our work, and that nothing else can substitute, as I say, for going from the living human person now to something that may link to the deeper neural difficulties that we gradually, and chemical difficulties that we gradually uncover. Now let me talk for a moment about neuroimaging. I'm not a great student of neuroimaging, but I know a certain amount about it. And one of the things that has most impressed me and thrilled me about neuroimaging is the fact that it's an interactive process. It's an interactive, or you could even call it an interpersonal process. That what you get in the way of a picture on the neuroimaging screen is an account of what the person's response is to the procedures and the very fact of the machine, or the operator of the machine. In other words, this is an ongoing response that you're getting from a person to their experience in this machine. Now that's a first, as far as I know, in our psychiatric experience, and it seems to me to open the door to a lot of possibilities. In other words, will we be able to speak to the patient and have what happened? Speak about intentionality? Will we be able to see the level of neural representations of intentionality change in the course of this, or make themselves manifest as we direct attention to intentionality? Well, I don't see why that would be impossible. It seems it's probably quite a way off. But that way we would be using the machine to link up with the actual clinical process, the actual clinical testing procedure. And we would have, perhaps for the first time in the history of our field, a kind of objective way of delineating what's going on psychologically. Now, we're not going to even, especially perhaps with our medical system going bankrupt, with everybody getting to be my age and therefore using enormous amounts of resources for even trivial problems, it's not likely that many people are going to be able to be given neuroimaging, you know. So it's going to be a little bit, in that respect, like autopsy. It's going to be one of those events that depends upon special circumstances to be used, right? So this will mean that our uses of neuroimaging need to be directed to those problems which are more clinically most apposite, which are clinically most relevant. And when we can do that, then we can check them out occasionally against other people or special cases and be able to use the methods which we've tested in the 19th century against autopsy, to use comparable methods to testing against some of the more objective findings of neuroimaging, or perhaps chemistry as well. Well, I've done this long enough, Joe. I want to mention a few more things and be sure I haven't forgotten something that my anxiety at being here would throw away from it. What I'm pleading for, of course, is methods comparable to reflex testing and percussion that limit disease, that allow us to say here, not there, right? I'm also trying to test our self-reporting so we're not abjectly dependent on self-reports the way we are in psychiatry. And I'm also trying to direct attention to health, away from our stigma-inducing preoccupation with disease. And I'm thinking that this will be a long, slow course, as it was in 19th century medicine, before we established our pathologies, which can only be done in the living human being, of course, you know, by such methods as neuroimaging, but also dependent upon how we test the living human being in the neuroimaging situation. And throughout this, I have, of course, emphasize the centrality of avoiding some of the weaknesses of questions and looking for devices like percussion or reflex testing that give us more spontaneous responses. Now, so that my goal is that we have everyday clinical methods which establish health functions, locate disease, and quantify what our perceptions are. Now, this is a forlorn effort. To draw a profession out of its habits is an exercise that no sane person would undertake. To draw a profession out of its deepest habits is an effort that no sane person would undertake. So I have thereby given you a valid test of sanity for this speaker. I learned that about 200 yards, maybe less, from this building in about 1959 or 60. I was doing a research project, which I won that Society of Biological Society Prize. I was doing it, and in my trying to find out where the laboratory was, that the guy who was helping me in the Brigham, Peter Bent Brigham as they called it, and I can't get these names straight either, the now Brigham and Women's Hospital. I went down into the basement looking for this thing. I did finally find the laboratory so I could find out what this guy had discovered for me about these catecholamine levels, which were so crudely calculated at that time. But in the course of wandering around and looking for this laboratory, I came upon a door which had over it a plaque. This was the door of the office of the professor of radiology. The internists, of course, had put the radiologist in the basement. Right? And on the plaque was a stethoscope, hammered into the plaque. And beneath the stethoscope was a little sign which said, hear this carefully now, an instrument once used in the practice of medicine. Now that's not true, is it? Because everybody announces they're a doctor in a hospital by having one of these things draped around their neck. So it's still in use, right? It's still in use. But you know what that meant. That acrid, ironical subscript. It meant that the radiologist had a hell of a time getting the internist to look at an X-ray, because they knew that their stethoscope could tell them the truth. And when I inquired about them, one old-timer said he'd heard it took about 30 years. Now that's unbelievable to me, but maybe he was just cynical about the medical intelligence. I know that the introduction of the stethoscope was strongly resisted, an earlier stage, because in those days a real physician had a handkerchief, and they were very proud of their handkerchiefs, that they would put on the chest and put their ear on the handkerchief. And they didn't think there was anything that damn stethoscope could teach them, that my handkerchief, you could just hear medical arrogance having a ball with inventions. Now I love to think that what I'm suggesting would be as important as either the stethoscope or the X-ray, which is very unlikely, but it's going to be, my point is, it's going to be very hard to change our habits, to have people give up their automatic questioning. Of course, we're always going to question some, but in certain places, to give that up and to use routinely methods that give us something more spontaneous, perhaps something more reliable. Well, thanks very much.
All right. Sorry.
No, good.
I was wondering your thoughts about projective testing and how it's used now and where it may be used in the future.
Well, I'm sure many of you would immediately perceive what a telling question this is, because these are projective tests, these remarks. These are projective tests. And so that we could call that. So of course projective tests are invaluable. They're wonderful. I think it was a great idea. The trouble with them is they take too much time. We need to know it right now. Right? We have to call up the psychologist. And you're saying what I could do is just say that I'm condensing things from a projective test and using them in clinical ways, and that would be a very, very close to the truth. Harold?
Professor, thank you. Wonderful. Two unrelated thoughts, perhaps. First, having used brain imaging in a forensic psychiatric situation, I've been very struck by what seems to me to be a paradoxical response. On one hand, as far as the person, a defendant, let's say, who winds up having brain imaging done to him or for him, depending on one's perspective, it seems to be extraordinarily helpful as far as
seems to me that what?
It seems to be extraordinarily helpful as far as giving them some hope, not because there's going to be any difference in the jury outcome, there generally isn't, but because even subsequent to the jury outcome, it gives people a sense to be able to get some perspective on themselves, to be able to go ahead and live with themselves under conditions which would otherwise be unlivable. So I'm always struck by the therapeutic jurisprudence impact that brain imaging can have in a forensic situation. On the other hand, as far as a jury is concerned, if anything, it tends to distance and make them most skeptical and even harsher. So you have, on one hand, one is helpful on one level, but not on a therapeutic jurisprudence level, but not as far as the jury is concerned.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of that.
Well, I think you've made of it probably what should be made of it, at least as a start. But you know, you might think, if you think of neuroimaging as our equivalent of post-mortem studies, you know, if you were referred to post-mortem studies in the courtroom, that too would have a special impact. And but the subtlety of using that kind of process in a contested thing is very great, because you don't know what being a prisoner being tested for a jury is going to do to that very brain that you're talking about. So that you've got a number of influences, and you're going to have to. It's good.
I was just going to say we have other questions.
Les, a neuroimage of my brain would reveal embedded in the temporal lobe a number of your comments and teachings over the years, one of which I thought you were actually going to get to, so allow me to ask about it, because it seems to be the next step. And the projective testing is what triggered this thought. The Rorschach is more projective, if you will, than the TAT, because it gives you really no formed images. One of your comments at one point was that you tried to explain to residents less speech, more noises. That you actually got more out of folks when you even went beyond simple statements to, my two favorites are, as I say, fancy that, and the patient then feels compelled to explain without you actually asking about it. Or in some cases, a particularly passive-aggressive individual, a very weary sigh, which sometimes triggers people to say, well, actually there are some things I can do. The notion of a statement noise as another form of even more projective test.
Right.
You've spoken about that. I wonder if you wanted to.
Well, I wouldn't add anything to what you said, Tom. No, that's true. I want to make a footnote to that, though. Some of you are going to say that this is too elaborate, takes too much time. There's no business in it for a managed care environment that we're in. And I would contend, as having done this under high-pressure circumstances, that that's not true. That indeed, by the use of testing statements of this empathic kind, you reduce the amount of time you spend with the patient, because you get to things quicker. More efficient, and that questions so often impose so much defensiveness that the time loss is made up for by avoiding them. I also want to say just, if any of you who would like to read Sullivan, read in the psychiatric interview, I think it's in the psychiatric interview, his interview book, his account of noises that are useful in changing the subject. And this would interest managed care very much, because if we could just get the patient off a subject and onto another subject, we could get ahead with the interview, right? And he suggests a noise, I think your phrase was, a noise like a ball bearing with a little bit of sand in it. Now, I don't know how the hell to make that noise. But the point is a kind of gurgle that, you know, as Tom was imitating, a kind of which which is like lowering the temperature in the room so the person wonders what is going on without creating a cause célèbre, you know. And Sullivan says in this passage, he says, after the patient has been slightly disturbed by that, they will forget what they were talking about and go on to another subject. John?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the techniques for sounding out and things. If maybe you've already gotten the optimal level of sounding these things out, not to, I mean, neuroimaging is very important. When you're talking to somebody about suicidal ideation and sounding them out in this way, could that in fact be the ideal method of doing this, and not that it's some primitive method that we're going to find neuroimaging that would actually give us the amount of ideation that the person is having at that time? I mean, could this be the optimal technique?
Can I say that a little bit again? I'm not quite sure I get it.
Could your sounding out actually be the optimal level at which to find out about suicidal ideation? Could it be that we're not going to put that stethoscope and hang it up for good? Because could neuroimaging really ever get to the point where it'll be that helpful to talk to somebody about suicidal ideation? Will it really ever replace that kind of sounding out?
Yeah. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. I wouldn't put any limit, John, on what can be done instrumentally with the brain. And with the computerized images of the brain. Emerson Pugh's famous comment, if the brain was so simple that we could understand it, we wouldn't be able to. That's clever, but I don't think that's going to be true. I think that really that what we will develop is methods of understanding which are not ours, but are developed mathematically and computer-wise that may make it possible to reach a level of confidence that we can't imagine at this time.
I was going to ask how you sustain this kind of conversation, because there's only so many times you can tap on somebody before they say, cut it out. So I just wonder how you keep it up, time after time, hour after hour.
Well, you'll find that people love to be tapped on. They really do. Of course, some people resent anything you say, but you see, if you're getting close to what they feel, they will feel confirmed in their own states, and you'll find that they can stand a great deal more of this than they can questions. That's my experience, and I don't mean there's no limit to it, and I think you're wise to. We don't want to make this a fetish the way questions were a fetish.
On the sounding out of the paranoid patient, an example that you gave when you said there are plots to kill you, and the patient denied the plot. What if in your sounding out the patient actually believed that? Would you be creating confusion or fear in a patient by making that a statement rather than a question?
This is a very good point. It's one that often comes up in these discussions. If you say something, maybe they'll be led to believe that. And of course, it partly depends on how you say it. If you say it in a certain way, they might think you meant it, and the gullible ones might believe it. But when you say it tentatively, I don't think you're going to find that so much of a problem. But I don't mean that there are not difficulties with any clinical methods. And no matter how seemingly unintrusive or how well placed, as somebody who spent a lot of my medical life, I did 2 years of medical internship before I went into psychiatry, I spent a lot of time in medical percussing. There's a lot of trouble you can get into percussing or reflex testing for that matter. I don't know whether you people know how to do the Babinski right? But I can tell you how to do it wrong. Joe?
Well, it's just wonderful having you here, Les. I was actually raising my hand in response to the question that Tony had posed about how much percussing, how much sounding out can you do?
Yeah.
And I think that question gets to the heart of a great loss that this institution sustained when Les went to Cambridge. Because there was a time when we had the opportunity to see Les Havens conduct this type of interview, not on a yearly basis, but on a weekly but daily basis. And one could see the art of sounding out that Les, in part, truly invented. Sitting here when you talked about the issue of questioning, a thought flickered through my mind that occurred to me in this building when I was a medical student, being supervised by Frank Delso. You'll remember the name, probably no one else will. And he labeled himself as Point Out Delso, because he would say that you don't learn anything of use about patients by posing a question. You simply put a distance between the two of you. And that, of course, is something I didn't understand as a medical student. He said it. I never saw him put it into action. He could just tell me when I wasn't doing it. When I got here as a resident, and I saw you using this, I understood more what Point Out Delso was really trying to convey. And I would say to you, Tony, and to all of the rest of us, I hope there's a case conference this afternoon, as the schedule says, because you may see, we may have the opportunity of seeing Les put into action some of the words here. For my education, I think this is one of the most concise, conceptual, organized statements of what you do and what you've shown us how to do over so many years. And as somebody who had the privilege of having you as a supervisor in my first year of residency, who had the privilege of seeing you in another aspect of your life, walking around the wards, the inpatient units, we had them in those days, walking around the units, the wards, 6:30, 7 at night, talking to a patient here and there, knowing them, but tapping into them. It didn't take many taps of the finger for you to percuss a patient that you knew, and percuss just what was relevant to find out. And Les, you've been a consummate teacher to the field, a consummate clinician to those of you who saw, to those of us who saw you in clinical practice. And I hope that this visit on the occasion of the Hazenbush lecture can only in some ways bring you closer back to us. Because now that you're, I hear, only working part-time, maybe you can visit us more often.
I'm still working full-time, Joe, but thank you.
Well,
Thank you for that. I hope that was recorded, because I want to play that to myself every night before I go to sleep. You're very generous, as always. Ming?
I think it's a remarkable clinical statement in terms of how to interview a patient. That is like the technique which surgeon used to cut. And if you observe the surgery, some surgeons are very skillful in cutting without bleeding. And some just cut it and bleeding all over. And if a psychiatrist is a good training and good experience and very good intuition, which is either you have it or you don't have it. That is my feeling. You can train some person to a certain extent, but beyond that is the potentiality, the genetic predisposition to have that kind of, either you have it or you don't have it. And recently you mentioned another comment which I'd like to make is this. You may have read or not read the editorial which I wrote for American Journal of Psychiatry for this month.
I did.
You see, your comment about the health status and wellness, which we physicians tend to ignore. And from genetic point of view, Mendel, when he talks about the gene, it is for normal color, shape, and that type of thing. However, when it's applied to medical genetics, we are always talking about the abnormal gene. The gene which causes this disease, that disease, And now, with the genetics technology developing, we are talking about the genome as a whole. So when you talk about the genome, there are bad genes, but there are many good genes which protect us. So in that editorial, I comment about the Hendricks study on wellness, the genetic predisposition to be healthy. Those genes are all over in our bodies. Then I actually add another sentence saying that it is not just a wellness, it is the ability, talent to cope with the difficult situation. I mentioned very clearly, if you put the person into a very difficult environment, some of them cope so well, and that may be some of the genes which actually, for this type of person, to be interacting with the environment, to be able to cope with that. So that is what I talk about. And today, I'm very impressed by your statement about that we tend to ignore the health aspect of in psychiatry. We always like to see someone who is sick. And when I went to London, with a view towards the finding some abnormalities. And then my supervisor, after interviewing the patients, asked me, what's wrong with this patient? And I tried to come up with that there's no delusion, there's no hallucination. Then his answer is that, in my view, this patient is perfectly normal. I was just very intrigued by his statement. Then gradually I know to tell the patient, from my interview, at this time, I know you don't have delusion. You don't have very serious conditions. And that statement which you today mentioned very clearly, and in my genetic work, you see genome, all the genes, the sequences will be reported in a few months. There must be many, many genes which is actually protected, healthy genes. So for the prevention, we need to find out the those genes which are pathological to us, but the those genes which is actually maintain our health status. So in response to your today's statement, I reiterate some of what I wrote in the editorial for the wellness team.
And the resilience was the word you used.
Yes, right. I used
resilience.
Yeah.
But just one comment about the transparencies, because you didn't actually make it explicit, although it was there on the transparencies. There's so much in the tradition of what you've taught us and in the tradition of what Semrad taught us in this institution. When you asked when you made the empathic statement, the patient choked up and began to cry. That appeared 3 or 4 times in the paragraph and in the narrative. It was the presence of the affect that told you you had percussed to the right level. And I think one of the things that you have stressed, and so many people in this institution have stressed, is the importance of reaching that affect and establishing the affect as the sounding point to tell you where you are with the patient and to establish the alliance. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about the role of affect as you are making these kinds of statements.
Well, I wouldn't say any more than what you said. No, I think that's a particular resounding from sounding, a particular resounding that is not only comfort to the person, but also an indicator, as you say, of having gotten to something that may be very significant.
It's been my experience that patients have tremendous relief from that experience.
Right.
Feel that the session was worthwhile, and I often feel the same way.
Right.
And whereas the interrogatory method can leave you feeling
right. I think there's implied in that something which has surprised me over the years, that the work gets to be in a curious way fun. it's not work anymore. That it's a human experience that the rewards of which have astonished me over the years. That to be able to make relationships which feel honest and present, and all these words that don't do justice, makes it really an extraordinary opportunity for us. We're very lucky. We're very well placed in that regard. When I came into it, it was as a nerdy intellectual young man who wanted to understand all kinds of things, and worked hard to do that, and read everything. But to find in the course of my clinical lifetime and my writing lifetime too, that in many ways the best part of the whole thing has been these events that Carl refers to.
Just one another anecdote for Mass Mental Health Center.
Mm-hmm.
So, several years ago, Mass Mental Center received a check from a person's offspring, and he wrote saying this: when my parents one of my parents was brought here to Mass Mental, this patient was hospitalized here for 1 day. And the doctor told this patient that from our examination, you are not insane, and you are healthy. You can be discharged right away. This person's father, who was admitted here, was so pleased, and remember this doctor's statement, and then say that after I pass away, okay, when you use up some of your money, I'd like to give it to Mass Mental. Because of that 1 day hospitalization, because the doctor said you are mentally healthy, which we seldom emphasize. So today's, I just like to use this anecdote.
Les, I'd like to thank you for all your years here. I'd like to thank you for all your teaching, and I'd like to thank you for being the Hazenbush Lecturer this year.
Now you can eat.
Indeed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your remarks, sir.
I'm glad that you read the regime, the editorial.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I talk about the concept of genetics.